Magnets are everywhere. On your refrigerator, inside your phone, in hospitals, cars, and power plants. They pull, they push. They obey rules that seem simple. And yet, here is the uncomfortable truth. No one truly knows how magnets work at the deepest level. That sounds impossible. Science has equations. Science has laws. Science can predict magnetic behavior with extreme accuracy. But prediction is not the same as understanding. When you ask the most basic question, why do magnets attract and repel at all, the answer starts to slip away. It becomes strange. It becomes unsettling. And that is where today's story begins. This video is not about the surface explanation you learned in school. It is not just north and south. It is not just invisible fields and neat diagrams. This video is about what happens when one of the greatest physicists in history is asked a simple question, and instead of giving a comforting answer, he tells the truth. That physicist was Richard Feynman. Feynman was not just a Nobel Prize winner. He helped build quantum electrodynamics, one of the most accurate theories ever created by humans. He worked on the Manhattan Project. He taught physics in a way that made people feel like the universe was speaking directly to them. And when someone asked him to explain how magnets work, he did something shocking. He said he could not because he did not know physics, but because the question itself was deeper than most people realize. In this video, you will learn why magnetism is not just a force, but a doorway into the limits of human explanation. You will learn why every simple answer hides a deeper mystery. You will learn how magnetism is tied to electricity, motion, and the fundamental structure of reality itself. And most importantly, you will learn why Feynman believed that demanding simple explanations for everything can actually blind us to the truth. Along the way, we will uncover lesser-known facts that rarely make it into textbooks. Facts about how magnetic forces emerge from tiny quantum effects. Facts about why analogies fail when physics becomes too deep. Facts about how the language we use to explain nature can quietly mislead us. This is not just a lesson about magnets. It is a lesson about how the universe works and how the human mind struggles to accept answers that do not feel satisfying. Most videos stop at the point where things feel comfortable. This one does not. By the end, you will understand why magnetism is both one of the most useful forces in modern life and one of the most philosophically disturbing. You will see why Feynman's answer still unsettles scientists and students decades later. And you may walk away questioning how many other things you think you understand, but actually do not. Stay until the end, because the final idea ties everything together. It explains why the question why does not always behave the way we expect. It explains why science sometimes ends with description instead of explanation. And it explains why that is not a failure of knowledge, but a reflection of reality itself. This channel exists to explore ideas like this. Ideas that sit at the edge of science, philosophy, and human curiosity. Ideas that challenge what feels obvious. Ideas that remind us how strange the universe really is. Welcome to the channel. If you enjoy content that goes deeper than surface answers, subscribe and stay with us. New videos are coming that will continue to question the things we think we understand. Magnets stick to metal. They do it quietly, without effort, without any visible connection. You place one on a steel surface and it holds on as if something invisible is gripping it from the inside. There's no glue, no hooks, no moving parts, just contact, and suddenly the magnet refuses to fall. We accept this behavior without a second thought because it has been part of daily life for as long as we can remember. Magnets also pull and push each other. Bring two close together and they snap into place. Turn one around and they fight back. The force appears instantly. There is no delay. Nothing seems to travel between them. Even when they do not touch, they still know where the other one is. The space between them is not empty anymore. Something is happening there even though we cannot see it. This behavior feels normal because it is familiar. Children play with magnets. Officers use them. Engineers rely on them. The action is so predictable that it stops feeling mysterious. We treat it as a basic feature of the world, like gravity or friction. It becomes part of the background of reality. But familiarity is not the same as understanding. Calling something normal does not explain it. Saying that magnets attract metal only restates the observation. It does not reveal the cause. The real question hides beneath the routine. Why does this object and not another respond to the magnet? Why does orientation matter? Why does distance weaken the force but never remove it completely? At this level, everyday language starts to fail. Words like pull and push describe what we see, not what actually happens. They give the mind something comfortable to hold on to, while the true process remains unseen. The more closely you look at this ordinary interaction, the more it begins to resist, simple explanation. What once felt obvious starts to feel strangely incomplete, as if an important piece of the story is missing, even though the effect itself never stops working. Early explanations of magnetism give us a clean and orderly picture. Every magnet has two poles. One is called north, the other is called south. When opposite poles come close, they attract. When the same poles meet, they repel. This rule works every time. It is easy to remember. It feels complete. This idea becomes the foundation of how magnetism is taught. Diagrams show arrows pointing from north to south. Iron filings arrange themselves into neat patterns. The behavior looks structured and predictable, almost mechanical. With these rules, we can build motors, generators, and speakers. We can design systems that depend on magnetic forces with incredible precision. From a practical point of view, the explanation seems more than sufficient. But this explanation only describes behavior. It tells us how magnets respond under certain conditions, not what creates the response. Saying that north attracts south is not the same as explaining why attraction exists in the first place. The labels feel authoritative, but they quietly avoid the deeper question. They name the effect instead of revealing its cause. At this stage, understanding becomes circular. It's circular. North attracts south because that is what north and south do. Same poles repel because they're the same. The rule works, but it rests on itself. There is no deeper mechanism offered, only a pattern that repeats reliably. The explanation feels solid until you try to push past it. When someone asks why a magnet has poles at all, the answer often points back to the rule. When someone asks why orientation matters, the response returns to attraction and repulsion. The language closes in on itself. It becomes a loop that prevents further inquiry, even though the curiosity remains. This simple framework is useful, but it also creates a false sense of understanding. It gives the impression that the mystery has been solved, when in reality it has only been organized. The moment you ask what makes north different from south or why such a difference should exist at all, the neat picture begins to show its limits and the explanation starts to thin. To move beyond simple rules, magnetism introduces a new idea. Magnets create an invisible field. This field is said to surround the magnet and extend outward into space. It is present whether anything reacts to it or not, even in empty air, even in darkness, even when nothing appears to be happening, the field is still there. The field fills the space around the magnet. It has strength and direction. It can bend, stretch, and interact with other fields. When metal comes close, the field guides how the metal responds. When another magnet approaches, the two fields interact long before the objects touch. What looks like action at a distance is now explained as local interaction within space itself. This idea feels more advanced. It sounds deeper than poles attracting or repelling. The field gives magnetism a presence, something that exists independently of objects. It suggests that space is not empty, but active, that something real occupies the region around a magnet, shaping how matter behaves within it. Yet the word field does not actually explain anything on its own. It labels the effect without revealing its origin. Saying that a magnet creates a magnetic field simply restates the observation in more technical language. The question quietly shifts instead of being answered. Why does the field exist at all? Why does space behave this way around certain materials and not others? The field cannot be seen directly. It cannot be touched. It can only be inferred through its effects. Iron filings trace its shape. Compasses align with it. Instruments measure its strength. But these are all responses, not causes. They show what the field does, not what the field is. As the explanation grows more abstract, the mystery does not disappear. It becomes more subtle. The invisible force gains a name, a structure, and a mathematical description. But the core question remains untouched. Something fills the space around the magnet, governs interactions, and obeys precise rules, yet the reason for its existence stays just out of reach, hidden behind the comfort of terminology. To push the explanation further, attention moves away from the magnet as a solid object and toward the matter it is made of. Everything is built from atoms. These atoms are unimaginably small, yet they determine the behavior of objects we can hold in our hands. What looks solid and continuous is, at a deeper level, a complex structure of particles in constant motion. Inside each atom are electrons. They do not sit still. They move around the nucleus, and they also possess a property known as spin. This motion is not like planets orbiting a star, but the language of movement helps describe its effect. As electrons move and spin, they generate tiny magnetic influences. Each one acts like a minuscule magnet, producing its own contribution to the overall behavior of the material. In most substances, these tiny magnetic effects point in random directions. They cancel each other out. The object shows no noticeable magnetism, even though the activity is still happening inside. The magnetic influences are real, but they remain hidden by their lack of coordination. The material appears neutral, calm, and unresponsive. In certain materials, the situation changes. Large numbers of electrons begin to align. Their tiny magnetic effects start pointing in similar directions. When this happens, the individual contributions no longer cancel out. They add together. The result is a magnetic effect strong enough to be observed at the human scale. What feels like a single force emerges from countless microscopic actions working in unison. This explanation feels closer to the source. It connects magnetism to the behavior of particles inside matter itself. It replaces vague forces with specific activity. Yet even here, the explanation relies on description. Electrons move and spin, and magnetism appears. The connection is clear, but the reason remains subtle. Why electrons have these properties at all, and why their motion should influence space around them, is not answered here. The story becomes more detailed, but the foundation still feels incomplete. Not every object becomes a magnet, even though all matter contains electrons. In most materials, the tiny magnetic effects created by electrons point in different directions. They interfere with one another. One effect cancels the next. The result is balance. On the outside, nothing seems to happen. The material shows no attraction, no repulsion, no sign of magnetic behavior at all. At certain materials, this balance breaks. The internal structure allows groups of electrons to line up. Their magnetic effects begin to point in the same direction. Instead of canceling out, they reinforce one another. Small regions form where the alignment is strong. When many of these regions align together, the effect becomes large enough to escape the material and influence the space around it. This alignment does not require conscious control. It follows the rules of quantum physics and the structure of the material itself. Heat, pressure, and external magnetic fields can change the alignment. Sometimes the order is temporary. Sometimes it becomes locked in place. When it does, the object becomes a permanent magnet, carrying its internal order outward into the world. This explanation helps clarify why iron behaves differently from wood, or why a magnet can lose its strength when heated. It connects visible effects to invisible structure. It shows how large forces can emerge from tiny interactions working together in the right way. The behavior stops feeling magical and starts to feel mechanical. Yet the explanation still rests on deeper assumptions. It explains how alignment produces magnetism, not why alignment should matter in the first place. It describes the conditions under which magnetism appears, but not the origin of the rule itself. Why do aligned electrons influence space beyond the material? Why should their internal order create an external force? At this level, the explanation becomes more precise, but not more satisfying. Each step forward answers one question and exposes another beneath it. The mechanism becomes clearer, but the foundation remains unexplained. The behavior is traced back to structure and motion. Yet the reason those features produce magnetism at all remains unresolved, waiting beneath the surface. When explanations start to feel difficult, analogies often appear. Magnets are compared to stretched rubber bands, invisible strings, or hidden springs pulling objects together. These comparisons sound helpful because they translate an unfamiliar process into something physical and familiar. They give the mind an image to hold on to. The force feels less strange when it is described in everyday terms. But these analogies quietly distort the problem. A rubber band pulls because it is made of matter under tension. A string transmits force because it is connected from one point to another. Both rely on contact, structure, and stored energy that can be seen or touched. Magnetism does not work this way. There is no stretched material between magnets. Nothing is being pulled tight across the space separating them. When magnetism is explained through these images, one mystery is simply swapped for another. The question shifts from how magnets attract to how the invisible rubber band exists. The explanation feels complete only because the new mystery is hidden behind familiar language. Comfort replaces clarity. These comparisons also suggest a mechanical cause where none exists. They imply that magnetism is the result of some unseen object doing physical work in the space between magnets. In reality, the force arises from the structure of fields and particles, not from hidden connectors. The analogy masks this by imposing a picture that does not belong to the phenomenon. Richard Feynman strongly objected to this kind of explanation. He argued that pretending to understand is worse than admitting uncertainty. An analogy that feels right but explains nothing blocks deeper thinking. It convinces the listener that the problem has been solved when it has only been renamed. The danger is subtle. Analogies feel like answers. They reduce discomfort. They make complex ideas sound manageable. But magnetism does not behave like the things used to explain it. When forced into familiar shapes, the phenomenon loses its true character. The explanation becomes smooth, but reality remains rough, resistant to simplification, and unwilling to fit inside comforting metaphors. As the explanation goes deeper, magnetism stops being an isolated phenomenon. It becomes part of something larger. Magnetism is one expression of the electromagnetic force, one of the fundamental forces that govern the universe. This force is responsible not only for magnets, but for electricity, light, chemistry, and the structure of atoms themselves. Without it, matter as we know it would not exist. At this level, physics becomes extremely precise. Equations describe how electric charges move, how magnetic fields form, and how changes in one create changes in the other. These descriptions are tested again and again, and they work with astonishing accuracy. Engineers rely on them. Technologies depend on them. The behavior of the electromagnetic force can be predicted down to tiny fractions of a unit. Yet precision is not the same as explanation. Physics tells us how the electromagnetic force behaves, not why it exists. The equations do not explain where the force comes from or why the universe includes it at all. They simply state the rules it follows. They describe patterns that nature obeys without revealing the reason those patterns were chosen. At this step, explanation turns into acceptance. The electromagnetic force is treated as a given, a basic feature of reality that cannot be reduced any further. Asking why it exists leads to silence, not because the question is foolish, but because there is nothing deeper to point to within current understanding. This is where many people feel discomfort. The desire for a final reason remains unsatisfied. The mind expects a cause behind every rule, a story beneath every law. But the structure of physics does not always provide that. Some aspects of the universe appear as foundations, not consequences. Magnetism, once traced to this level, loses its mystery only to reveal a larger one. It becomes part of the universe's underlying framework, a rule written into reality itself. The force can be measured, manipulated, and mathematically defined, yet its existence stands as a fact rather than an explanation, a boundary where description ends and deeper questions begin to press forward without answers. Richard Feynman was not trying to avoid the question when he spoke about magnetism. He was pointing to a deeper problem with the way people ask questions about nature. The word why carries an expectation. It assumes there is always a simple cause waiting at the end of the chain, something that will feel satisfying once it is revealed. Feynman challenged that assumption. In physics, every answer often opens the door to another question beneath it. The force is explained by a field. The field is explained by particles. Particles are explained by equations. The equations rest on principles that cannot be derived from anything simpler. Each step feels like progress, yet the ground never quite stops dropping away. There is always another layer, another rule, another description waiting below. Feynman believed that understanding this structure was more important than memorizing explanations. When someone demands to know why something happens in everyday terms, they are often asking for a translation, not a truth. They want the universe to behave like familiar objects in human experiences. Nature does not agree to those terms. At some point, explanations end not because knowledge fails, but because the question reaches a boundary. The laws of physics describe how reality behaves. They do not justify themselves. They do not explain why they are true instead of something else. They simply are. Expecting more can be a misunderstanding of what science is capable of offering. This idea can feel unsettling. It removes the comfort of final answers. It suggests that reality is not built to satisfy curiosity in the way stories do. There is no hidden narrator explaining the plot. There are only patterns that exist and can be studied. Feynman's message was not pessimistic, it was honest. Accepting that nature simply is does not end curiosity. It changes its direction. It shifts focus from demanding ultimate reasons to exploring structure, behavior, and relationship. In doing so, it reveals a deeper respect for reality as it exists, not as the human mind wishes it to be. From a young age, people learn to trust intuition. If something moves, something must push it. If something pulls, something must be attached. The world feels understandable because it follows patterns the human mind evolved to recognize. These expectations work well at human scale. They help with survival. They make daily life manageable. Over time, they start to feel like rules the universe itself should obey. Science quietly breaks that expectation. Magnetism does not behave in ways intuition demands. Nothing visible connects the magnet to the metal. yet the force appears. Nothing touches, yet motion begins. The cause does not resemble the effect. The universe does not pause to explain itself in familiar terms. It simply follows its own structure. This disconnect is what makes the truth unsettling. Reality does not promise to make sense to human instincts. The laws of nature were not designed for comfort or clarity. They were not shaped around human language or mental shortcuts. Intuition evolved to throw rocks and climb trees, not to understand fields, particles, and forces acting across empty space. As explanations grow more accurate, they often grow less intuitive. Mathematics replaces imagery. Abstraction replaces story. The universe becomes describable, but no longer familiar. This feels like a loss, even though it is progress. Understanding improves, while comfort fades. At some point, every explanation reaches a boundary. Not a wall of ignorance, but a limit of reduction. The laws still work. Predictions still succeed. Technology still functions. But the desire for a deeper reason goes unanswered. There is no final layer where everything suddenly makes sense in everyday terms. Accepting this is not a weakness of science. It is one of its strengths. Science does not pretend the universe is simpler than it is. It does not invent comforting narratives when reality refuses to provide them. It stops where evidence stops. This acceptance changes the relationship between humans and the universe. Reality is no longer expected to agree with intuition. Instead, intuition must be trained to follow reality. That shift is uncomfortable, but it is also honest. It acknowledges that understanding has limits, and that facing those limits is part of what real science demands. Magnets appear simple because they are small, solid, and familiar. They sit quietly on desks and doors. They do their job without noise or motion. Nothing about their appearance suggests depth. Yet beneath that simplicity lies a direct connection to the most fundamental rules that govern reality. A magnet is not just an object. It is a visible trace of invisible laws at work. Through magnetism, abstract forces reveal themselves in everyday life. The same rules that guide electrons inside atoms shape the behavior of entire machines. The same force that bends a compass needle also holds atoms together and allows light to travel through space. A small piece of metal becomes a gateway to principles that operate across the universe. What makes magnets unsettling is not their behavior, but what their explanation demands. Following magnetism to its source strips away comforting ideas. It removes mechanical pictures. It abandons familiar causes. What remains is structure, pattern, and rule without narrative. The universe does not explain itself in stories. It presents behavior and invites observation. At the deepest level reached by physics, the explanations stop feeling explanatory in the human sense. They no longer answer questions of purpose or origin. They describe relationships that exist consistently and without exception. The laws do not justify themselves. They simply hold. This realization changes how understanding feels. Knowledge no longer means reducing everything to something familiar. It means recognizing where familiarity ends. It means accepting that some truths do not translate into everyday language without distortion. Magnets quietly demonstrate this lesson. They work perfectly without needing to be understood intuitively. Their reliability does not depend on human satisfaction. They obey rules that existed long before humans asked questions about them. Sometimes the most honest response to a deep question is not a story or an analogy, but acceptance. Not because curiosity has failed, but because reality is spoken as far as it can. The universe does not promise explanations that feel complete. It offers behavior, consistency, and structure. And beyond that, it offers silence, not as a flaw, but as a boundary. Magnetism begins as something ordinary, but it leads us somewhere unexpected. What looks like a simple force turns out to be a signpost, pointing toward the deepest structure of reality. Each layer of explanation brings clarity, yet also reveals a boundary. Physics describes how the universe behaves with incredible precision, but it does not always provide the kind of answers the human mind wants. Richard Feynman's message was not that science has failed, but that honesty matters more than comfort. Some questions do not end with a neat explanation. They end with a rule, a pattern, a fact of nature that simply exists. Learning to live with that truth is part of real understanding. Magnets remind us that the universe does not owe us intuition. It operates by its own laws, whether they feel satisfying or not. And sometimes recognizing that limit is more powerful than any simplified answer. If this video made you see magnets and reality itself in a new way, show your support by liking the video. It helps the channel reach more curious minds. And if you enjoy exploring deep ideas that challenge how we think about the world, subscribe to the channel. More videos like this are on the way.